Well, hello there. This is Robert, and it's good to be back with you again and showing you some more of those good classic country LPs, records that I have that I really love and enjoy and wanted to share with you. Some good classic country stuff. Now, first of all, I don't know if you can hear it, but in the background is playing the first album of Wanda Jackson, and just a good album came out in 1958 of Wanda. It was her first Capitol album. She had made a few singles before that, but a very good listen, country, a couple rockabilly numbers on there as well. Next, this was on King. It came out in the early '60s, called "The Best of Hank Locklin." It features his songs such as "Let Me Be the One," "Send Me the Pillow You Dream On," "Same Sweet Girl," and others. Now, these were songs that he recorded in the late 1940s and early 50s for the Four Star label. And King, a lot of times, would reissue LPs of artists who recorded on the Four Star label. There were occasions where they released, certainly on their Webb Pierce and Ferlin Husky releases, where they overdubbed the original recordings. On Hank Locklin, these are not overdubbed, but these are the authentic recordings that he made in the late 40s, early 50s. Another one of King's artists in the early 50s, a little known country guy, made some nice records, was a guy by the name of Charlie Gore. He had one was kind of a minor hit, "If God Can Forgive You, So Can I." Had another fairly popular one, "Heaven Sent You to Me." Had a nice voice, had a real nice sound. This is on the Audiolab label. Audiolab LPs are very tough to find, and this is one of their country releases from the late 50s, but it's some of the recordings that Charlie Gore made for the King people in the early 1950s. Next, this is Jimmy Martin. First album for Decca. It came out around 1960. It featured many of his recordings, which he was so well known for. "You Don't Know My Mind," "Hold What You Got Before the Sun Goes Down," "Night," and a nice instrumental with J.D. Crowe. Bear Tracks. J.D. Crowe was working his band. He's in the picture there, as well as Paul Williams and others. Jimmy Martin had an excellent sound, made many fine records for Decca in the 50s and 60s, and this is the first of those albums, and in many people's minds, the best of the albums he had for Decca. Next, nice old Cowboy Copas on Starday release from 1960. This featured the recording of "Alabama," which had just become a hit. He had a very nice comeback career. You'll find his early recordings on the King label. And these are recordings he made when he came back for Starday in 60, 59, 60. And he made a series of fine recordings before perishing in the same plane crash that killed Hawkshaw Hawkins and Patsy Cline. A couple of these I may have shown before, but it's always worth showing again. The first Son, Johnny Cash album. And it did feature "I Walk the Line." This came out in 56. Again, "So Doggone Lonesome," "Folsom Prison Blues," "Rock Island Line," some of the very early Sun recordings, and that early classic Johnny Cash sound on this album. Next, we had the Browns. This was the Browns' first album, and this came out in 57. It was recorded in 56, late 56. "I Heard the Bluebird Sing" was a big hit on here. They had a number of other of the country style with the fiddle and steel guitar. The Browns had been recording for the Faber label people for a few years prior to that. A couple of those recordings, such as "Looking Back to See," is also on this. Interesting thing when you have this LP is the day that this photo was taken in the studio. He grabbed the guitar quick for the photo shot, and if you were to see the album down the neck is Hawkshaw. This was Hawkshaw Hawkins was in the studio at the same time this picture was taken, and Jimmy Brown grabbed his guitar, and that's the one that's in the photo. One of the very popular Buck Owens albums from '65 with his hit "I've Got a Tiger by the Tail." Buck Owens albums were excellent. They included also quite a few contributions from his band members, and so you get to hear a lot of Don Rich, Doyle Holly, and those doing their songs as well, such as "Streets of Laredo." Don Rich doing the fiddle instrumental of "Maiden's Prayer," and then there's Buck's hits, "I've Got a Tiger by the Tail," and "Let the Good Times Roll," and "Crying Time." So all in all, it's a Class A listen from Buck. This album, a nondescript cover, but it's the last album that Don Reno Red Smalley recorded. This was recorded in 1971. It's actually one of the best things they made. The recordings of the sound called on these was excellent. Don's guitar work on Letter Etched in Black. Also the recordings of There'll Come a Time, Silver Haired Daddy of Mine. This album was recorded by a DJ popular in the Baltimore area, Ray Davis. And he had Wango Records was his company. And he had a way of just getting a classic bluegrass traditional sound and getting the best out of these. And it's kind of sad because Red Smalley was in very poor health. He was in his last days. He died shortly after recording this album. But this stands as just a classic album. And if you haven't gotten this, give a chance to give a listen to it. Don Reno Red Smalley. Now in the 80s, Rounder Records did some nice reissues. Rounder is known as a bluegrass label. But in the 80s, they went back and they got some of the old country recordings that had never been put on LP. And nice sound quality, nice liner notes. And they released a few. They went back and it's just nice to get them. This was a Ray Price one that Rounder released in the 80s of recordings he made from 51 to 53. Actually, there's a couple from 56 on here. But it has the original of I'll Be There, Wrong Side of Town, Road of No Return, Wasted Words, Cold Shoulder. A very good listen. And it was able to get some of those recordings that people had not heard for many years. Rounder also did one then of Flatt and Scruggs. Actually, they did a couple, The Golden Era, in which they brought out some songs on Flatt and Scruggs that had never appeared on LP before. The original of I'm Head Over Heels in Love with You, I'm Waiting to Hear You Call Me Darling, Till the End of the World Rolls Around, Dim Lights, Thick Smoke, I'm Gonna Sleep with One Eye Open. Again, this was a fascinating listen, and it came out also in the 80s from Rounder. They also did a very nice one on Lefty Frizzell, the early recordings of Lefty Frizzell. Picture on the front is of him in later years, but you were able to get Run 'Em Off and How Long Will It Take to Stop Loving You, If You Can Spare the Time, Look What Thoughts Will Do, and a lot of others. And this was the only way at that time to get some of these original recordings. Rounder also did a nice one on the countryside of Carl Perkins. And I love the photo on the cover. But Rare and Unissued Sun Masters. Very good album. Featured more of his countryside and a very good listen. Again, this was from Rounder in the 80s. And there was another in the 80s, Ernest Tubb Honky Tonk Classics. Ernest Tubb's original recordings had not been released. Most of them, many of them, had not been released on LP. And this went back and got I Ain't Going Honky Tonkin' Anymore, Try Me One More Time, Answer the Walking the Floor Over You. There's going to be some changes made around here. Filipina Baby, That Wild and Wicked Look in Your Eye. And the liner notes on it are fantastic. And so, again, another very good release from them. And finally, they had one, Little Jimmy Dickens, Straight from the Heart. Little Jimmy Dickens was noted for novelty songs a lot, but this featured many of his more straight-ahead songs, ballads. My Heart's Bouquet was on it, Ribbon and a Rose, Wedding Bell Waltz, I've Just Got to See You Once More. Again, all of these from the late 40s and early 50s. Let's see, next I have one of the early Louvin Brothers albums. Again, nondescript cover on, nice picture of them on the back of My Baby's Gone. This came out in the late 50s, but featured some of those singles in the mid 50s of My Baby's Gone, I Wish You Knew, I Wish It Had Been a Dream, When I Loved You, You're Running Wild. So nice album from them, from that era. One of the very early Merle Travis albums, Back Home. This was an album originally recorded in 47. It was released on just 78, which I have that, called Folk Songs from the Hills. So when the LP era came out, they took and released those, such as 9 Pound Hammer, John Henry, 16 Tons, I Am a Pilgrim. They added a couple more songs to it, and then this LP came out in the mid-50s. Speaking of guitar work, one of the early Chet Atkins albums. This was released in 57, recorded around 56, fingerstyle guitar. Again, a very simplistic style, featuring mostly his playing. The backup on him was just a very small country backup. Some of the recordings were a little bit of a classical nature. Some were Spanish tunes. Malaguena is a fine guitar instrumental. Swedish Rhapsody, another one. Glowworm. But really, it's an excellent album. It's not mired in all the Nashville sound productions of the 60s that you would hear on Chet Atkins album. Next here is one that's very scarce album to find. It may be an artist that you don't think much about, but in the early 50s, she was country, had a little pop inflection to her, was Bonnie Lou. Her big hit was Tennessee Wigwalk. She had another one, Seven Lonely Days, and was very little released on her over the years. King went back and released one album of hers in the late 50s, and this is it, Bonnie Lou Sings. And it features many of those recordings. It's also an album that is about as scarce as hen's teeth to try to find, and to try to find one in good shape. You just will not hardly come across this album, but this was the one King label released on her. Then we got a nice shot of a Merle Haggard from the 60s, Legend of Bonnie and Clyde. Flatt and Scruggs LP had a similar type of cover from around 68. And then this Merle Haggard as well had the Legend of Bonnie and Clyde. I also had Today I Started Loving You Again, a very well-known song with Merle Haggard, only he called it I Started Loving You Again. And then finally, going back a little ways, and some of these early artists, it's good to give them a listen and give them a chance. Roy Hall and the Blue Ridge Entertainers. They were a band from back in the late 30s, very early 40s. Made some fine recordings, and this album features many of them from 40 and 41. He had the first popular recording of Don't Let Your Sweet Love Die. He had a neat sound with a acoustic steel guitar. He had Tommy Magnus played fiddle in his band. He had a good mountain sound, but it had a commercial ear to it. This was a County Records release from years ago of some of those recordings along with the booklet enclosed. But it's a very good album to give a listen to. Sadly, he died in 41 in a car crash, or it could have been early 42. I'd have to look at that again. But right around that time, he died in a car crash, and his band got split up and never did have the success anymore. But for a little while, he was getting right popular. So that's what I have for today. Next time I'll have a few more to show you, and I will get back to, we'll let Wanda Jackson take us on out of here. Till next time, we'll see you. Bye.